Was there planting in Eden? We ask because Jesus declared authoritatively that a seed does not germinate without dying, but there was no death in Eden. He said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." That is John chapter 12, verse 24. So was there planting in Eden? Jesus used the seed in this verse to represent himself primarily. He also applies it to the Christian by extension. He was at this point on the verge of folding up his life and giving it back to the Father, trusting that the Father was going to make the right use of it. This is called faith. The Bible calls it the faith of Jesus. He was about to commend his spirit into the hands of the Father, satisfied that the Father should give his forfeited life to the world. And forfeit it he did. We know this from the fact that in the hour of his supreme agony, when he was made sin for us, Satan and his demons pressed upon his sinless soul the possibility of an eternal separation from his sin-hating Father as the ultimate price he would have to pay for carrying the sins of humanity. And he gives us a chance to hear his soul's hand-to-hand combat with the demons of hell in the words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" It was as if he sinned himself and the Father was afflicting him for the burden of sin upon his soul. Hope did not present to him any prospects of coming forth victorious from the grave. Angels were not permitted to brighten his benighted tomb with the hope of a glorious resurrection. Upon this backdrop of a possible eternal separation from the Father and from life itself, he cried out, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." This was as if to say, whatever this may cost me, I hand to you my life to give to as many as I sacrificed it for. Jesus died the second death for humanity. He calls himself the bread of life, and life is only drawn from bread as the bread is spent up. Christ was spent up that we may have the life that was in himself. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. That is John chapter 15, verse 13. Christ laid down his life in the fullest sense of the word. Satan himself could no longer deny that Jesus laid down his life for the world, even if there was no taking it up again. But you ask, Jesus being God always knew the end from the beginning, and Satan could not veil the portals of the tomb for the Son of God. It is true that before he took upon himself humanity, Jesus saw the entire path he would tread. But while he was here, he, as an obedient son, depended on a moment-by-moment revelation of the Father's will. He says, the Son can do nothing of himself. That is John chapter 5, verse 19. This question is normally asked by many because of their misapprehension of Jesus' authentic humanity. Many do not fully appreciate the infinite sacrifice that it took for Christ to fully become human. Jesus' humanity to them is simply a drama. For them, God pretended to be man. He did not really become man. They have not reconciled Jesus' divinity and his humanity according to knowledge. They even doubt that Jesus could genuinely fall asleep because God cannot lose consciousness. They think it honors Christ's divinity to think that Christ could not feel pain, hunger, or even be weary. They do not choose to follow Christ's example closely because they reason that there was always some divine resource that Jesus drew from secretly to relieve his suffering and fight off Satan, and which it is not the privilege of the rest of humanity to draw from. But the Bible teaches that Jesus was as fully human as all of us, and he was as fully divine as all of us should have the divine nature to overcome the world. His divinity was different in that it was his by right. His divine nature was underived. He is God. But when he handed his life to the Father in the incarnation and took upon himself humanity, he handed him his divine prerogatives as well, without losing his divine nature, that is, his divine essence. While here, he repeatedly said, I am in the Father. As his days, so was his strength, and he was obedient unto death. He resisted unto blood, striving against sin. And he never sinned so much as in a thought, and thus became a spotless lamb. In his humanity, he depended upon the Father through the elect angels, even to perform his miraculous works. The Bible repeatedly speaks of the angels helping him. Apostle Paul says he was made a little lower than the angels, and he performed not so much as a single miracle to relieve his own suffering. He did nothing for himself that it's not our privilege to do in our conflicts with sin and Satan. His first temptation in the wilderness was to presume on his divinity and use it to advantage himself, turning stones into bread for personal use. He overcame it and thus fully identified with his humanity. The Bible makes it clear that in his humanity, Jesus did not always know all things. This is solemn, and the Christian must be moved deeply by the infinite sacrifice of the eternal God becoming man. It is written, for example, that the child grew in wisdom, and I suggest that you fully know what growing means. Satan himself knew the limitations of Christ's humanity and sought to take advantage of it. The serpent could not have bruised the heel of the seed of the woman had he not have become authentically human. Concerning the authenticity of Christ's humanity, Satan seems to have more faith than many Christians. Every seed has a germinating principle, but when it is planted, it dies literally. Then God places in it a new spark of life and it germinates. The seed yields up its life in order to gain it again more abundantly. This happens literally and every time and is a demonstration of God's power to bring the dead back to life. Paul says, "But some man will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened except it die. And that which thou sowest not that body that shall be, but bare grain. It may chance of wheat or some other grain." That is 1 Corinthians 15:35-37. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 11, we read, "And God said, let the earth bring forth grass and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so." The fruit and seed are to be after his kind. The word seed used in this verse is the same in the original language as the one used in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15 to point directly to Christ. Though the plant somehow produces the seed, or do we say the seed produces the plant, it's the seed that carries the genetic material for the plant. But the seed of the woman, the seed of humanity, is Christ. Read Genesis 3:15 and the Bible is simply one long repetition of this theme. Throughout all ages, God had fully intended that Christ was going to be not only a member of the human race, but also that he was going to reproduce himself in glorified humanity. As the seed preserves the life of a given species when planted, so Christ was going to be planted in the bosom of the earth for our life. As the giant reptile lies quiet in the egg, and as the giant oak lies dormant in the acorn, so did humanity lay hidden in Christ for all the years of eternity past. Christ is the seed after our kind. He has the spiritual gene pool for the second birth of all humanity. He is the hope of our glory. It's fully the intention of God to reproduce the character of his Son in humanity. The properties of the divine soul and mind are to be ours through Christ. That is what it means to be born again, to be born afresh, born into the family of God, born of God. Like Christ, we voluntarily lose our lives, that is to say, our own will, and receive his life in exchange. And by what measure we give him our human lives, he gives unto us his divine life. Read that in Mark chapter 4 verse 24. But we need all that he is willing to give in order to overcome the world. He says, "Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it." That is Luke chapter 9 verse 24. We must be willing to lose our lives, our desire to manage ourselves, in order to have his divine life in the soul. He had led the way by his own self-sacrifice. Whenever we plant, we do well to remember that the seed remains viable by being willing to give up its life, that other seeds may live alongside it or with the forfeiture of its own life. The seed must be willing to sacrifice its life, that other seeds may receive its forfeited life. It doesn't matter that the seed itself receives back its own life. It is enough that other seeds will get life from the forfeiture of its own. During creation, Christ wrote the plan of redemption in the very heart of nature. He created seeds for plants. He was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. That is according to Revelation 13 verse 8. The plan of redemption was not an afterthought. God had made abundant provision for the eventuality of the abuse of human and angelic will. Though Adam and Eve may simply have been dressing and keeping the garden without engaging in planting, seeds existed before the fall as the life insurance policy for the plants. The life of the different species of plants after the fall could only be propagated through their seeds. Before there was sin, there was Christ as the life insurance policy for the human race. Though the Creator, Christ was always in the loins of humanity. Apostle Paul says, the body is for the Lord and the Lord for the body. That is according to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 13. The body is for the Lord through His divine Spirit dwelling in us, and the Lord is for the body through His eternal plan to be a member of the human race and is uniquely adapting Himself to dwell in us. But Christ also applied the seed to the Christian, that though we are not called upon to yield our lives for others like He did, we are called to yield them for ourselves. We have to die in order to live. We have to yield our sinful lives and wills in order to have His glorious life and will. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. That is John chapter 12 verse 25, which is a continuation of John chapter 12 verse 24. And the Bible says concerning His resurrection, but now is Christ risen from the dead and become the firstfruits of them that slept. That is 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20. He came forth from the grave as the firstfruits of them that slept. This reminds us of a feast with similar name among the Jews. The firstfruits were presented before the Lord just before the harvest of the entire field. If the firstfruits is wheat, then the field must be wheat. Christ went to the right hand of the throne of God with glorified humanity. That means with what body and glory came from the dead, He intends to raise His earthborn brethren. Apostle John says, Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when He shall appear, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. That is 1 John chapter 3 verse 2. Christ is the seed of humanity. He contains the spiritual genome from which we are fashioned in this life and by which we will be glorified in the hereafter.